So here we are, closing out the trilogy, Back to the Future Part 3. Directed by Robert Zemeckis once again, with screenplay again by Bob Gale. The story and characters created by both of them. We have Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, and Thomas F. Wilson all returning, this time joined by Mary Steenburgen. And I said briefly last time, this was done back to back with Part 2, due to mainly having Michael J. Fox available. He was on a break filming the show he was on. It was a case of let's use that resource while we've got it. Plus, it meant that the films could be released very close together in Hollywood terms. They didn't want a massive gap so people had forgotten a lot of what happened in the second one and would have to do massive recaps. What that also meant, however, though, was there are stories of Robert Zemeckis having filmed, or done the day's filming, going over to oversee the sound dub with Bob Gale, and then back out for the next morning's shoot. It was very hectic, it was probably very stressful, but they got the job done, and I'm glad they did. These past 3 weeks have been an appreciation of this series, spurred by the 40th anniversary of the first one, yes, but I wanted to give my appreciation to all of them. My notes for these haven't been extensive because I've been enjoying the ride. But of course, I can't do a video about a film without talking about the film, so... And yes, there will be those moments like I've had in the past 2 weeks where if I don't say certain things, the internet thinks you don't know about them, even though they're everywhere and everyone does, so there will be a couple of those. So one of the things that I've seen out on the internet, people have the theory, and I mean, I thought it myself. When Doc says, you know, Brown comes from Von Braun, family emigrated, etc., I did think, could this be a relative of Werner von Braun? However, von Braun is a relatively common German surname, and obviously anglicised as well to Brown. It sounds exactly the same, so it's probably not the case. I mean, also, as with a lot of Hollywood, a lot of filmmakers have Jewish ancestry, probably don't really want that connection, but it's one of those, if it's your headcanon, it's not really harming anyone, and it's a fun little thing that you can think of. Other fun things include the fact that Clint Eastwood actually approved and was even honoured and tickled by the fact that they wanted to use his name for Marty. And it does mean the scene towards the end, at the shootout, when the guys in the bar are like, well, Clint Eastwood will be the yellowest person who ever lived in the West. There's almost a sense of Marty wants to protect the honour of someone who technically by that time doesn't exist yet. And I just find a lot of humour in that, and like I say, I'm glad that Eastwood was on board for it and enjoyed it. Now, one of the things that, whilst we're talking about names, one of the things that gave me pause, and I did some research, because occasionally I do that for videos, is the use of Indians. Now, of course, in the Old West scenes, perfectly fine, it makes sense, it's the term that was used then. But in the 60s, 70s, there was a bit of pushback, and still now, some people don't know what term to use. I'm still not entirely sure. Some people use First Nations, Native Americans, Indigenous, etc. But the thing that I found out, which is strange, is there are some older people of that descent who, because that's the term they've always been known by, are actually kind of fine with it. They prefer it because it's what they're known, and it links into the idea of, if you want to know how to refer to a group of people, ask them. So it's one of those where, yes, modern sensibilities may not like it, but technically it's not the worst thing, if that makes sense. Now, in this film, there is, a celebration of what the other two are. It is a third part of a trilogy. There are commonalities all the way through. Something confuses me, because Lorraine's family is the Baines side. They're not McFly's. So seeing Leah Thompson as Maggie McFly confuses, because she shouldn't look like that. Originally, Crispin Glover was meant to be Seamus if he'd have come back for 2 and 3. It's fine with Michael J. Fox playing that because it's his bloodline. I don't have an issue. But Leah Thompson being Maggie does confuse me, unless she's also a Baines. That's a possibility. We don't know her maiden name. But of course, what it's there for, and I totally understand it, it works for filmmaking, is the fact that it gives us the third iteration of the, oh, that was some weird dream, Mom, scene that we've seen in all 3 entries, so it's fine. Now, before I go much further, now that we are talking about stuff in the past, I didn't mention it last time, but I mentioned it in the first one. Alan Silvestri's music is really the backbone of this film, and the Western themes that he pulls out for this, I absolutely love. There are so many films that I love that have Alan Silvestri scores. Like him, Howard Shore, there's a few more, I'm sure. I mean, this isn't about them, so there are some really good musical moments in this. There are elements of determinism absolutely throughout the entire trilogy. We have the clock tower, which is a crucial part of every time period, or it's a central part of the town in every time period. The Tannins are all bullies. The Jones family deals in manure. We also have the saloon, which is also where Lou's place in 55 sits, as well as the gym in 85, and Cafe 80s. So it's always been this social hub, and more often than not, drinking hub for Hill Valley. And it's just interesting, the attention to detail throughout this entire 5 years between the first one and this. And I totally appreciate it. The amount of thought and effort that's gone in to make everything work and make sense and have these common threads that are just there as much as anything for little in-jokes. I haven't even mentioned the fact that Strickland family throughout are in positions of authority. There's so much of this, like I say, determinism and fate, even though the future is still malleable. It's always being rewritten, but there are these core threads, and I like that. It handles time travel so well. I mentioned earlier there are some obligatory bits of trivia. First one is coming up, which is, yes, Michael J. Fox was actually hanged for a short period. He even passed out. Fortunately, that wouldn't have caused the brain damage or any kind of brain damage that might have exacerbated the Parkinson's situation. But it happened. It's quite terrifying. And yeah, it's one of those where that could have gone very badly. Luckily it didn't. And we got a great scene out of it. But with Marty's character, there is one thing that I know has caused a lot of confusion for a lot of people. In the first, we see this fear of rejection. He's not really someone to stand up for himself too much. He then sort of trains George to be a bit more confident, and in part 2 and part 3 we see him offended and almost super defensive of being called chicken or whatever equivalent. Now, some have attributed this, it is such a widespread thing that I can't give you the exact origination of it, but some have potentially said that maybe George's confidence change caused this ripple effect, and this is why this version of Marty, even though he seems pretty much the same, we followed him, we haven't noticed any major changes, he has this now thread of I have to stand up for myself because my dad did. That's what he's instilled. Now, I have the thought that Seamus's brother Martin is mentioned here. He stood up for himself and he died. So there could be a McFly family trait that George was sort of the outlier and needed to just have the push. Or that the reason that the family line exists is because they're cowards to a degree. And maybe it's more that Marty feels that pressure. It could also be, there are reports of a deleted scene where that's touched on a bit more, and Marty does have a moment in the first film where he stands up for himself, but because we never saw it, it's difficult to count it as canon, technically. With this kind of thing, there's so many fun theories you can come up with. So I like the idea that it's George's confidence change, but I appreciate there are other viewpoints. But throughout the film, of course, we have the relationship building with Doc and Clara, and Mary Steenburgen wasn't someone I was super familiar with until this film, really. I mean, I was only around 7 or so when this was released, so maybe a bit later, because back then films were released like synchronously around the world. It was often months, sometimes a year or so later. But still, I was young, so I wouldn't necessarily have known her too much yet, but I've seen her in so much since. And she's so funny, and in this she's so charming, and you can totally understand why Doc would fall for her. And it's nice to see Doc getting a different angle. The last 2 films have really been about the McFly story. But this was very much like, well, Doc's an important character as well. Emmett Brown is an important person in his own right. So let's give him something. I totally appreciate their story. The fact that he tells her the truth when she asks for it. But, of course, at the time, I mean, anyone even now would think, well, okay, you're just making up a story to get out of it. Until it clicks and she does go and hunt him down to lead to the ending. And that whole ending, even though I know how it ends, I've seen this multiple times, I still got the anxiety. That's how much I was along for the ride. And so obviously, yes, the film ends, we have Marty back in his own time, we now understand what could have been the Rolls-Royce incident. I love the fact that finally we got that explanation capped off, which again is the benefit of doing those two together. You could have Flea appear as younger Needles, and fun fact, all of his gang are different members of Biff's, well, Tom Wilson's various iterations of the Tannen family throughout the years. There's one from each time period in there, which is absolutely brilliant. But yeah, so we understand now what that was all about. And I said at the start that yes, I would talk about the really obvious one that everyone on the internet will tell you about if you don't mention it directly, and that's Vern's pointing. Daniel Evans does this weird gesture. You've probably seen it shared around like creepy kid on Back to the Future 3 points at his junk. Or some people have called it his flux capacitor, and I love that. But there are people who have said that they've worked on various different things, and this is kind of a common thing for children, perhaps to kind of indicate they might need to go to the bathroom. And the fact that it then kind of goes into a close-up of Doc, like the shift of the focus, so maybe he could be taken to the bathroom. It all makes sense. It isn't a creepy child. This is a real human being who apparently, from what I've seen, was a ladies' man later in life, so good for him. I wonder how many times he... No, I'm not gonna make that joke. That's wrong. But still, yeah. So this is Back to the Future Part 3 over. This is Back to the Future Trilogy over for me. A fun series of films with some great through lines, some, yes, repetition, you know, the Tannen manure thing constantly, you know, yes, you could go, these films would be so much shorter if they didn't just repeat things from other ones. But so many franchises do that, callbacks and things, it's for the fans. In this day and age where almost every series out there is fan service in some form, especially with things like Star Trek and Star Wars, I don't mind it in this. This is part of the joy of these films. It's not done like a lot of stuff these days where it is fans making the stuff and therefore wanting to call back to their childhood. These are filmmakers who are having fun, telling the story they want to tell and doing it in a way that they know will work for audiences. All of the people involved in here have a long and storied history. And that's why these are some of my favourite films that I've absolutely enjoyed throughout pretty much all of my life. So thank you very much for letting me talk about these films the last 3 weeks. It's been a fun journey for me, and I hope it has for you too. If there are bits of trivia that isn't stuff that everyone knows, please feel free to leave it in each of the videos. But until next time, hold on. I've got a feeling I'm forgetting something. I've got a letter to post. So until next time, thank you for watching and take care.